Okay, folks. Good evening. This week's class is going to be about the certain teaching in the Zohar, which I think is a pretty important one, very critical one. And although it is somewhat unusual in the annals of mysticism in general, and even in Jewish mysticism, to approach these subjects, but nevertheless, I think that you'll understand by the end of it, hopefully, why I'm addressing the subject, and we will see definitely the Zohar and Kabbalah in general's approach to such matters. I know I'm being a little bit mysterious, but you'll see shortly why that is. First of all, let me just get up on the screen a set of verses that are important here. Okay, here we go. I'll reduce it even a little bit more, and then we'll be able to get it in the whole thing. Yeah. Okay, so this week's Torah reading, as everybody knows probably, we read through the entire 5 books of Moses every year, and complete an annual cycle. So we read a section every week, and this particular week, because there are 53 sections, 53 they're called parshiyot, 53 parshas in the Torah, and there's 53 sections. So in some years, some of the sections are read as 2 sections together. So this particular week is a double reading, which is called Achrei Mois and Kedoshim. Achrei Mot and Kedoshim, meaning to say the section that deals with after the passing of the 2 sons of Aaron and all the laws that are associated with that, and the laws of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and then we come to the section called Kedoshim. Kedoshim really means holiness. Parshas Kedoshim. So this here, the 2 sets of verses that I have over here at the beginning of the second section, which we read, and it's the section is called Kedoshim. Kedoshim means holy ones, holy ones, or as we will see shortly, the translation. I've written it up in Hebrew and English. I hope you can see it. I'm assuming you can see everything. So it says, Kedoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem, be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. If there's any problems with the sound or with the being able to see things, just let me know, and I will adjust accordingly if necessary. So, the first verse is, be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. And then the next verse is, Ish imo v'avi tira'u, a person, or every person must revere their mother and father. I have it the wrong way around here. It should be mother and father. Mother first and then father. Let me just fix that. Mother and father must revere their mother and father. Ves shabtotai tishmoiru, guard my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. So first of all, what is the meaning of Kedoshim tiyu? The verse says to us that we have to be holy, and yet it doesn't really explicitly say what that means. Be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Secondly, what does that have to do with every person must revere their mother and father, and my Sabbaths you shall observe? Like, what's the connection between these 2 things? Is it stating to us, is it telling us that in order to be holy, these are the things that we have to do? Well, let's examine it a little bit closer, and we will see. First of all, the Hasidic approach to this, and then we'll get on to the a statement in the Zohar, something that the Zohar says. Okay. Be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Some of the commentaries comment on this, Rashi and various others comment on this, and say, you might think that you can be as holy as God, be holy, for I am holy, and therefore, Yachol Kamoini, you might think like me. Talmud Loima, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am, Talmud Loima, Ki Kadosh Ani, I am holy. In other words, my holiness is not the same as your holiness. That is the simple, straightforward explanation of the verse. Be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Don't think, however, that your holiness will ever reach up to my holiness, because it won't. That is the simple explanation and explication of the verse, as found in the various commentaries. However, the Hasidic commentary, starting with the commentary of Rabbi Dov Ber of Mezrich. Rabbi Dov Ber of Mezrich was the successor to the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. He was very instrumental in grounding and spreading out the teachings of Hasidic teachings. This is Rabbi Dov Ber of Mezrich. In fact, it was largely because of him that Hasidism really took hold very, very strongly right throughout Eastern Europe and Europe as well. So, Rabbi Dov Ber explains as follows. He says, don't read it like this. Don't read as the statement of the sages that you might think you can be like me. Don't read it as a question. You might think you can. Do you think you can be like me? And then it goes on to say, I am holy. Ki kadosh ani, kedushasi, my holiness. Lamal mikdushaschem, my holiness transcends your holiness. That's the simple explanation. Rav Dov Ber says, don't read it like that. He says as follows: read it this way. Don't read it as a sort of a question. Don't read it as, do you think you can be like me? Read it as, think that you can be like me. You can, in fact, indeed be like me. You can, in fact, be godly. Why is that? Because my holiness above is a result of your holiness below. Kedushasi lamayla mikdushaschem. My holiness above is because of your holiness. Let me just, I think I should write it in to make it, to give more clarity to this. Let me just write it into the text over here, and you'll see what I'm talking about. This is from the commentary, right? The commentary says as follows. If you think that you can be like me, I am holy. Okay, that's what it says. So this is what the commentary says. Now I'm going to reinterpret it the way Rabbi Dov Ber says it. He says like this. Skip those words. You could do this in Hebrew. It's much more difficult to do it in English, right? He says like this. Treat these words as if they weren't there, right? Treat these words as if they weren't there. If you think, right? Oops. If you think. Don't read it as that. Read it as think that you can be like me. Or you can even leave the brackets over here and let's say, you can be like me. It's all in Hebrew script, so it's going the opposite way than it should. Okay. So he says, you can be like me. And the reason is, I am holiness. My holiness not is above, transcends your holiness, but my holiness above, leave that out, leave this out as if it didn't exist there. My holiness above is, let's put this in these kind of brackets, is a result is a result of I guess I should have done this before, huh? My holiness above is a result of your holiness. In other words, when you are holy, if you are a holy people, then my holiness is not enhanced but manifested. My holiness is manifested. So, what does this mean? My holiness above is a result of your holiness. Essentially, the concept of holiness is the concept of separation. It's being separated from the mundane. It's very hard to describe what holiness means. There's no real clear definition of the concept of holiness. But it means, really, it's described in sort of in negative terms. It's described as the opposite of unholiness, which doesn't help any. So to define what holiness is very difficult. So what does it mean, therefore, that my holiness above is a result of your holiness? Along comes the next verse, and we have to understand this. The simple explanation is, how does a person express their holiness? Through revering your parents, your mother and father, and through observing the Sabbath. That's a simple, straightforward explanation. However, the Zohar does not see it like that. The Zohar comes along and explains it very, very differently. The Zohar explains, just one second. The Zohar explains as follows. The Zohar says that you might think that holiness is some sort of state of being that's completely divorced from the world. And that's the way very often we find it described in various mystical literatures and in academic literature as well. Holiness means to be divorced from the world. It means to be separated, and that in truth is what it means in Hebrew as well. It means separated from mundane things. However, the Zohar says that where do you find holiness? You find holiness specifically in at those moments where a person expresses his holiness in certain types of actions. What are these types of actions that the Zohar is talking about? The Zohar says that when a husband and wife, a man and woman, are together, they live together, and yet they live a life of holiness. In other words, they're married to each other and they live a life of holiness. That is when the holiness of God is expressed. The Zohar goes on to a long explanation of exactly what this means and how it works, but basically the idea is as follows. Holiness is not something that is divorced from reality. You will find in Buddhism, for example, and even in Christianity and various other religions, that in order to be holy, you have to leave the world. You have to go to your ashram, you have to go to the Himalayas, you have to go up to a cave, you have to go to a monastery and be celibate, or a nunnery and become a convent rather, and become celibate, and so on and so forth. Judaism does not hold it like this. Can you record for a friend? Yes, it will be recorded anyway. You can pick up the recording on YouTube. I'll give you the link if you want afterwards. So, divorcing ourselves from the world, says the Zohar, is not the way of the holiness that's expressed over here. Let me explain it a little bit better. There's a concept which is called echad. Echad meaning oneness. Now, oneness can be expressed in a number of different ways. Obviously, the most important oneness is the oneness of God. As we say in the prayer, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. What does that mean, that God is one? It doesn't mean that there's only one God and there's not more than one God. It doesn't mean that. No. It means that everything that there is ultimately godliness. The creation of heavens and earth, everything that exists, is not something that's a separate entity that is now divorced from godliness. It exists within godliness. Let's put it that way. The background to it, the underlying, the underpinning force that keeps creation in existence is godliness. There's nothing else. And as the verse says, there's another verse that says, Ein oid milvado, there's nothing besides God. So that's God as he is in himself. There's nothing besides God. In other words, from his point of view, from the point of view of creation, of created beings, that's us, the oneness of God is expressed in the fact that all things that take place, everything that exists, is there by divine providence. It's there by divine will. And when we realize that these two things are not separate, that the force that creates the world and the force that transcends the world are one thing, that's called Hashem Echad, God is one, right? In other words, the immanent powers and the transcendent powers, immanent and transcendent, are all one thing. Says the Zohar, the same thing really applies to human life as well. That paradigm of oneness applies to human life as well. You have two different forces. You have the male force and you have the female force. You have male and female. Zohar and Nekeva, as it's called in Hebrew. When male and female unite, then that's an expression of oneness. Now, what do we mean when they unite? Is it a uniting of souls? No, it's not just a uniting of souls. It's also a uniting of bodies, uniting of the physical. In other words, intimacy, physical intimacy. Now, why is that important? What is the Zohar trying to get at? So the Zohar is explaining as follows. There's a concept in Kabbalah which is called zivug, right? Zivug means coupling. Now, what gets coupled really is the spheros. Yeah, the sphirot are generally divided into male and female sphirot, right? The sphirot, the divine emanations called the sphirot, are divided into male and female sphirot. But more importantly, every cluster of sphirot has either a male quality or a female quality. So, for example, the sphira of Chokhmah, which is called Abba in Hebrew, Abba meaning father in Hebrew, and the sphira or the Partzuf, as it's called, the Partzuf, the visage, the Partzuf, the cluster, which is of Bina, which is called Ima. So Abba and Ima, father and mother, which is Chokhmah and Bina, when they unite, then they can produce offspring, right? They can produce the other sphirot. So in order for them to unite, when they do unite, that's called zivug. But in order for them to be able to unite, so they have to bring down, there has to be elicited a greater light from above that has the ability to actually cause them to unite and to bear offspring. Uniting doesn't always bear offspring, but when there is when light is elicited from above and higher power is elicited from above, then offspring is born. Let me go into it a little bit further. When a child is born, so the Talmud explains that there's three partners in the birth of a child. Who are the three partners? The mother and the father and the Almighty. The mother and the father give the various parts of the physical being, and God gives the soul. Accordingly, that's an expression of the zivug, the uniting of the mother and father, and a new soul comes down in order to enliven the body that will be produced, or let's say the reproduction, because of the reproduction of the parents, the body that will be reproduced, I guess you could say, the body that will be born is given the soul given its life force by the Almighty, by God. That is called zivug. But that zivug is paralleled, that zivug, that unification, in a physical sense, is paralleled by unification in a spiritual sense. When that goes on, when a husband and wife unite to make a child, that very same paradigm is repeated in the spiritual spheres. In other words, there's a uniting of the sphirot above when that takes place. However, there's only a uniting of the sphirot above when the act takes place in holiness. Now, when is the what do you mean? We mean it only when that act takes place in holiness. Holiness always means, as we said before, it means separation. But in the Jewish sense, it doesn't mean separation so much as restriction. It doesn't mean to separate yourself from the world, but it means to restrict certain activities to certain holy times. Restricting certain activities to certain holy times. Now, times, in other words, the cycle of the year, the cycle of the week, annual cycles, weekly cycles, daily cycles, all of them have within them certain times when auspicious times, when the times themselves are sanctified. In our prayers, we say, Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim, God sanctifies time. When is sanctified time? Sanctified time is at these very special times when it's possible to elicit from above spiritual force or spiritual inflow into the world, into the physical world, into the physical attachment of male to female. This is exactly, in fact, how the Zohar explains this verse. So, my holiness above is a result of your holiness, and that's why every person must revere their mother and father. Let me share the screen again. Sorry about that. Every person must revere their mother and father, meaning to say like this. When is their holiness above? When it's a result of your holiness. When does your holiness take place? Your holiness takes place as follows. When there is a zivug of a husband and wife, a mother and father, when there is a connection, a coupling of the mother and father at a holy time, then the parents of the child must be revered. Meaning to say, when the coupling takes place at a holy time, the child that will be born will be one that will have respect and reverence for their parents. When is that holy time? That holy time, says the Zohar, that's on the Sabbath. The holy time is on the Sabbath. When should the coupling take place? In other words, when should parents come together to be intimate together? At holy times on the Sabbath. And then the child that is born, it becomes a holy child. Now, let's just take a step back for a minute. What we've been saying is that ultimately, the holiness of God is not expressed in separating oneself from the world. The holiness, it's easy to separate yourself from the world and to be holy. When a person does not have any distractions or any anything that's pulling him one way or the other, any appetites for things that would normally or could possibly lead one astray, when one doesn't have any distractions of that sort, then it's very easy to be holy. But the most important aspect of holiness is when one lives in the everyday world, but one lives in the everyday world above the world. When one lives in the everyday world, but transcends it in the sense that one only does things in a holy manner. Meaning to say that the coupling, the intimacy of the husband and wife, has to be such that it is done in a holy way. Not in a way of just satisfying my passions, but in a way of attempting to reflect the coupling of the sphirot up above that brings new life and new energy into the world. Just like a new child, a new energy is born to the parents. If the intention of the parents when they're having their intimate, their moments of intimacy, when that is meditated upon as a reflection of something that is going on in the higher worlds, and ultimately when it's a reflection of the way the immanent and the transcendent aspects of God are essentially one, and the human being, the husband and wife, are become essentially one flesh, as they were before Eve was separated from Adam, before Chava was separated from Adam. They were one flesh, and now they return to one flesh. Where do they return to one flesh? In their child. The husband gives some, the wife gives some, and God gives some. Why is it that the husband and the wife and God all give their separate parts? Because ultimately they're not separate. They become one thing in the child that's born. That child will be an expression of holiness if the moment of intimacy was also a moment of holiness. And that's why these verses are in fact connected. When is my holiness expressed? It's a result of your holiness when you act in ways that are holy, even in times of intimacy, which is the most passionate of moments that we experience in life. But even in intimacy, one has in mind that one is doing something which is essentially transcendent. One is not just having an intimate relationship sort of like an animal, just self-gratification, but that this is a partnership in which we both become one, and we become one with the Almighty, we become one with the Divine. Then we understand why it is that we have to revere our parents, and when do we do this? On the day of Sabbath. Now let's just express this in a slightly different manner. This concept of being holy essentially means, the way it's understood in Kabbalistic literature, Jewish literature in general, but particularly in Kabbalistic literature, is always having in mind, the concept of holiness is always having in mind that whatever it is that we do, every action that we do in the world, and even actions such as intimacy, even actions such as eating, any action that we do, can always and should always be connected to divine pathways. In other words, when we're doing something, we should realize and we should be aware that we could be doing it without any spirituality at all, in which case we're just doing what animals do. Or we could do it as human beings with consciousness of the divine, with consciousness of divinity. Understanding that what we're doing here as an act, essentially, the act of intimacy, is essentially an act of love. It's an act of love which expresses not only our love for the husband to the wife and the wife to the husband, but an act of love towards the Almighty as well. It's obviously for this reason that in Jewish thought, in general, abortion is something that is completely anathema. There's only some very, very rare exceptions if the life of the mother is in danger, and then abortion is a possibility. But I don't want to get into political issues now, but just know that the reason for it is that this is a God-given force. Now, it can happen, and it's the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, the famous Kabbalist, explains, it can often happen that parents of a very lowly spiritual stature, when they couple together, they might, for some reason or another, in some inexplicable way, might elicit a very, very holy soul. That holy soul sometimes comes down in such a way that it's born into a family where it's going to face huge challenges. When the parents are very ordinary people, in other words, just people without much spiritual awareness at all, that child is going to have to struggle the child, and later on as an adult, is going to have to struggle to be able to understand and absorb spiritual experiences. That explains, to a large extent, why people go through certain struggles in life. It's probably because their souls were not imbued initially with this awareness, with this divine awareness at the time of intimacy. However, if a person works on it, even if it's a very lofty soul, he'll have to work on it, he or she, they will have to work on it in order to elevate themselves to the level of spiritual sensitivity that essentially matches their soul. The classic example of this is, in fact, a woman called Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite who married a Jewish man. She was a Moabite woman, married a Jewish man, and she eventually took upon herself, she took the Jewish faith upon herself. Ultimately, she converted to Judaism, and she became the great-great-grandmother of King David. Right? She was the great-grandmother of King David. She was an extremely, she was born into a situation, she was a Moabite, and she was nevertheless a person of tremendous kindness. And eventually her kindness led her to stick with her mother-in-law. After her husband died, she stuck with her mother-in-law, Naomi, and eventually she remarried, and she married someone named Boaz. And together they eventually gave birth to, some generations later, they gave birth to King David. But she was a person who was not born into holiness. She was born essentially into unholiness. But through her character refinement and through her acceptance of divine principles, she actually became the great person who was worthy of having a descendant named King David. So the basic idea is, yes, as someone is pointing out in the private chat over here, sexual relations, intimacy, cannot be done out of lust. Yes, it can be, of course, but it shouldn't be. Yeah, it shouldn't be done out of lust. It should be done in a way in which the child born will revere their mother and father. It should be done on especially holy times, particularly the Sabbaths. That's the from Sabbath to Sabbath is the ideal time for relations, and it should be done in a way of zivug, in a way of interconnecting the sfirot. So that when there's a zivug of husband and wife, when there's an intimacy of husband and wife, it's also the intimacy of the sfirot, and ultimately the intimacy of the worlds with the Almighty, with God. That is the teaching of the Zohar. There's a question over here, which is the violent is on the learning about blame and revere becomes holy. Because ways petty concepts when justice Yep, you got it. Terry is really asking a very, very important question, and that is that what happens if one is born to parents who are cruel and vicious and nasty and just horrible parents? The Gemara tells a story about one of the sages who, one of the great sages who was sitting in the Beis Medrash, in the study hall, and his mother would come in on a regular basis and speak very abusively towards him and yell at him and scream at him and she was just she made him feel like like he wanted to be swallowed up by the earth. But he never ever disrespected her. He never expressed any anger towards her or whatever. He just let her say what she had to say, and he tried to appease her and calm her down, whatever it was. She was obviously she must have had some malady, some condition, or whatever it was. But one can respect even parents who are cruel and nasty without necessarily having great love for them. They did bring you into the world, or not you, but any person who finds themselves in this situation. They were brought into the world by these parents, and therefore they're owed a debt of gratitude to a certain extent. And one has to also say, I think, a little bit further, that had it not been for these parents and the difficulties with which which I encountered with them bringing me up, I would never have been able to be who I am today. In other words, facing the challenges of living in this world instead of retreating from them and running away from them and sort of becoming completely self-absorbed, dealing with those challenges and dealing with the process of healing from very bitter early life experiences makes a person incredibly strong. Not only just incredibly strong for themselves, but a source of strength for other people as well. And so in other words, a negative situation like that can be seen as having some positive qualities to it. Yes, it's very, very distressing when a person has, I was just dealing with a situation yesterday, in fact, where a father had been physically abusing his child, not sexually, but physically abusing and verbally abusing his child and so on and so forth. And the child turned out to, he's not such a child. He's 15 years old now, 14, 15 years old, but he's a sweet, sweet, sweet guy. Very sweet boy. And he's, I think he's come to realize that his father has an illness and there's not much he can do about it, but he tries to, show respect where it's due. But, of course, there are limitations as to how much can be expected of a person. But dealing with challenges like that, as dealing with any other challenges, just raises one up to a higher level altogether, higher level in general. And so my answer to you is, yes, if God would have wanted him to have other parents, he would have had other parents. And therefore, it's sometimes necessary to endure such things in order to transcend them later on and become a better person for it. Are there any other questions?